We're coming on the air with the horrific reality for 19 parents in Texas attending funerals today, bearing witness to those tiny caskets for their kids in Uvalde as the first services begin for the children murdered at Robb Elementary a week ago. Here in Washington, gun reform's on the agenda, but is this time going to be any different? Up ahead, we're live in Texas, and we'll bring you the NBC News exclusive interview with an off-duty Border Patrol agent who went inside the school to save his wife and daughter. Plus, President Biden sitting down with the Fed Reserve Chair to talk about the inflation costs that are probably hitting your budget in a real way. And thanks to NBC's exclusive reporting, we're now learning it's starting to weigh on the president, too. We'll explain. And we're hearing from Lia Thomas today. Remember her, the first transgender athlete to win an NCAA championship? We'll talk about how she's responding to the controversy around her victories. Plus, as Asian American and Pacific Islander Month comes to a close, we go behind the scenes of a high schooler's fight to stop hate crimes by encouraging schools to teach more about Asian history. That's in the backstory. And older Americans who turn to retirement at the height of the pandemic, getting back to work. We break down unretirement in tonight's original. Hey, I'm Hallie, and tonight parents in Uvalde will begin to bury their children. They will begin to bury their kids a week after a shooter stole the lives of 19 students and 2 teachers in a classroom there. This afternoon, we saw the funeral for this little girl, Emery Jo Garza. She was a swimmer. She wanted to be an art teacher. You saw her there holding up her honor roll certificate. She got that just hours before the massacre. The Girl Scouts actually just posthumously honored her with the Bronze Cross, which is one of the Scouts' highest honors. That's partly because her grandma says she tried to call 911 to protect her classmates. Later tonight will be the service for Maite Rodriguez. She hoped to become a marine biologist. She wanted to graduate from Texas A&M. There was also a service today, a visitation for Irma and Jose Flores. Irma, who was killed by the gunman, and her husband, who died a few days later from a heart attack while grieving his wife. And as these families live with their incomprehensible pain, the question here in Washington is, what action comes next? Anything? In a meeting with New Zealand's Prime Minister, President Biden says he does plan to get involved in those talks on Capitol Hill, reflecting on his visit to Uvalde.
Just so much of it is preventable, and the devastation is amazing.
A source tells NBC News a bipartisan Senate group led by Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy is going to meet again tomorrow via Zoom. And some of the ideas they're talking about today, trying to get more states to use so-called red flag laws. They want to try to expand background checks, raise the minimum age to buy a firearm, and more. The senator today says he's feeling encouraged. Listen.
I am admitting this feels different. The partners we're talking to sound sincere right now. I think we will know one way or the other, by next week as to whether we can achieve it.
Let's start tonight in Texas, in Uvalde, with Priscilla Thompson, who's on the ground for us there. So, Priscilla, you don't have to even elaborate on the horror for these parents who are now having to hold funerals for their kids. I know that there was one today, there's one tonight, there's memorial services as well. Tell me what it's like on the ground.
Well, Hallie, it definitely feels like a new phase of grieving for this community, for the families of these 21 victims, as they begin to say their final goodbyes in these private services that are going to be held every day this week and into next week. Some days, several services being held. So truly a continued feeling of mourning. And for those who aren't able to attend those private services, they're coming here to this memorial that has been set up where this tragedy unfolded just last week. There have been a steady stream of people coming here from all over, many of them with their children. And the emotions are also running high here. I've seen several people wiping away tears as they lay their flowers and walk away. And so it just continues to be a very emotional scene here as these funerals continue and as people try to stand with this community and grieve with them.
We're also learning more from this exclusive interview that Savannah got this morning on the Today Show with this off-duty Border Patrol agent who heard about the shooting, basically grabbed his barber's shotgun, borrowed it, and went into the school because his wife and his daughter were in there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. He says he was at the barbershop about to get a haircut, and he got a text from his wife, who is a teacher here, and she said, "There's an active shooter. Help, I love you." And he says that he grabbed a gun and he rushed over, and he describes what he saw as a scene of chaos. And as he tried to go in and figure out where his daughter and his wife were, and once he knew that they were safe, he continued working to help to get others out. Take a listen to how he described it.
After she got to safety, you continued to help.
Oh yeah, I cleared out the rooms there, saw all her friends. I coach Little League Baseball as well. I'm not an official coach, but I'm always there helping out. All her friends, I could just see their faces, half of them fine, the other ones panicking and crying, trying to make sure they weren't following and just delaying the process. So I was trying to just keep them as calm as I could as they were evacuating.
And one of the interesting nuggets from that interview asked his take on the police response. That agent says that he felt like officers on the ground here were doing everything that they could to help the situation. And obviously that is not how some people in this community and around the country feel, knowing that there was so much time that passed between when that shooter entered that classroom and when police went in. So still so many unanswered questions about that, Hallie.
Right, over an hour. And that response is why some had called for this federal investigation into the police response. That is now beginning, right? The Department of Justice announcing, hey, this is happening here. We don't know who's going to lead that review yet. But there is more and more scrutiny coming down on the school's police chief, Pete Arredondo. He was supposed to get sworn into City Council tonight. I understand that is not happening. That is getting postponed a little bit, yeah?
Right. That swearing in did not happen. The city manager didn't provide any further details, but the mayor here says he has still been elected and he could still take hold of that office. But he is at the center of many of these questions because officials say he's the officer who told police not to go in and to hold and not engage with the shooter, which is what so many of these questions around what happened in the police response are related to, Hallie.
Priscilla Thompson live for us there in Uvalde. Priscilla, thank you for being on the ground. And there are other places that are reeling after another deadly weekend of gun violence in this country. At least 17 mass shootings, 17 more mass shootings since Uvalde happened over the holiday weekend, according to the Gun Violence Archive. That means more than 4 or more people shot or killed, not including the gunman. When you take into account all shootings, preliminary data shows at least 156 people are dead, 412 hurt from gun violence, starting from 5 p.m. Friday to this morning. It's happening coast to coast. We'll just pick 2 examples to share here. Look at what happened in Philly. 2 women died, 2 others were hurt. One of them was a teenager. Look at Chattanooga, Tennessee. 6 people hurt, all of them teens. The city's mayor there laying out his frustrations on Twitter, saying, quote, "It's ridiculous that I even need to publicly state that guns have no place in the hands of our kids." President Biden tackling not just the issue of gun violence, but focusing on something else today, and that is the economic picture in this country, inflation, where in just the last couple hours, he met with the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, saying, listen, basically, Jay Powell, I'm not going to get in your way. Watch.
My plan is to address inflation. It starts with a simple proposition: respect the Fed.
National Economic Council Director Brian Deese was inside that meeting. Here's how he responded to a question just a couple hours ago on whether the president is happy with what the Fed's doing.
Consistent with respecting their independence is respecting their independence. He is focused on actually giving them the space to make those independent judgments.
The president's political life could depend on it. These numbers, check them out, from our most recent NBC News poll show only a third of Americans approve of how President Biden is handling the economy. Less than a quarter back how he's handled the cost of living. And from what sources are telling our team, it seems like the president's getting frustrated about that. Despite what you hear publicly from officials, that's what we're hearing behind the scenes from our team at the White House, whose exclusive reporting takes us inside the West Wing, with one White House official telling that team, I've heard him say recently that he used to say about President Obama's tenure that everything landed on his desk but locusts, and now he gets how that feels. Carol Lee is one of the people who put that story together for us. Explain this a little bit, Carol, because your White House describes a White House that is not, by the accounts of some people around them, not quite sure what to do next, where to go next.
That's right. And part of their frustration, Hallie, and the president's frustration, as we're told, is they just feel that the president is not breaking through. He's frustrated that he feels like he's not getting any credit from the American people. Republicans aren't getting enough blame for things like the way the economy is, for not helping him enough with his agenda in Congress. And so he's pressing a lot of his aides to come up with a sharper midterms message, for instance, to give him more policy prescriptions. He's frustrated about his poll numbers. They continue to sink. He's expressed dismay that his poll numbers are lower than former President Trump's, and he just finds that baffling, and he's frustrated by that. And so there's also just this general sense that the president feels like he can't catch a break. The locusts comment, for instance, it's this idea that no matter what he's doing, he came in and had significant challenges, COVID, the economy, and yet they keep piling up. And his concern is that his White House, his administration, looks flat-footed sometimes when these things crop up, including the baby formula shortage. We're told he's frustrated about that. So what do they do about it? They don't really know. They're trying to come up with a better message. They're saying that now the president's going to focus on the economy in June and that he's going to do more events. He'll be doing more interviews. Cabinet officials are out. He's meeting with the Fed chair, and to show that he's really on top of this. He wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. The problem the president has is that none of the things that he's talking about wanting to do, which Congress shows no sign of doing anytime soon, none of those things are going to be a quick fix to this. And so it's a really tough way to try to thread the needle, to get political credit while also not really delivering on what Americans want him to deliver on.
So talk about what we started this discussion with, Carol, which is the economic picture, right? Because we know for the next month, right, that is going to be a huge focus of this president and this White House. You've got the president laying out his plan in this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, right? Pick your audience, know your audience, I guess you could say, with that paper. Keeping the Fed independent is part of that. He wants Congress to do things to make things more affordable, et cetera. But all of that requires the action of others, right? The Fed, Congress, et cetera. Talk about some concrete steps that the president could take coming out of this meeting with Jay Powell now towards trying to get a handle on some of what we're seeing big picture in the economy.
There just really, honestly, isn't that much that he can do. Yeah. He's talking about potential student loan relief, for instance, Hallie. That's okay, but that's not going to be the silver bullet that he might need to try to deal with the inflation issue. And he's putting a lot of emphasis on the Fed and a lot of emphasis on what he wants Congress to do. The hope the president has is that Americans look at this, see what he's saying Republicans would do, looking at what he would do, and choose his side. I mean, that's as simple as it is. There's not much he can do executively, and Congress is an uphill battle, to say the least.
Carol Lee, thank you very much. Outside the White House for us tonight. Appreciate it. Overseas now, you've got EU leaders agreeing today to ban most Russian oil, 90% of Russian oil, by the end of the year. There's going to be a temporary exception on oil coming in by pipeline. You know that particular distinction was important for Hungary and a few other European countries that depend a lot on Russian oil. They wouldn't get behind a total ban. This latest move from the international community comes as in Ukraine, in the eastern part of Ukraine, Russia looks to be gaining some real serious ground there. You've got one village that's been without running water and power for weeks. The mayor even had to step in. The mayor stepped in to help distribute food to people. Another city has become a big target for Russian troops as the last Ukrainian-held city in the province of Luhansk. A lot of civilians have managed to get out, but one refugee group says about 12,000 people, a lot of them elderly, are still trapped there. Cal Perry joins us now. And Cal, we heard about this oil ban here, and then we heard from Ukraine and a senior official in President Volodymyr Zelensky's office who said this kind of thing was just too late, too slow and too late, right? Give us the context check here. What kind of an impact would an oil ban like this really have, given that we've heard from American officials, hey, the effect of biting sanctions takes time. This is not an overnight thing.
So look, at the outset of this, it'll cost Russia tens of billions of dollars, but it won't cost them what it could if we ban things like natural gas, if you stopped the shipping lanes, which provide crude oil. So this is just pipelines that carry crude oil with an exemption for countries like Hungary should that pipeline break down. It is countries like Hungary that took it nearly 4 weeks to come to some kind of an agreement because, of course, energy prices are important to these countries. And as we move from summer into fall and fall into winter, it's going to be expensive heating houses across Europe. And that is is the leverage that Russia has. I think when you listen to the advisors to President Zelensky, what they're really saying is that this is what Vladimir Putin talked about when he said he can address and show the fissures. He can show where the division is within Europe. And the division within Europe is, again, on energy prices, on crude oil, on natural gas, which Russia supplies, because the bottom line is, of course, energy prices are important to every country, and that's why it took 4 weeks to come to this agreement, Hallie.
This announcement came as we're seeing Russia zero in on the eastern part of Ukraine and some specific cities. They're now set to hold, or alleged to be holding, half of this one particular city that is in the east there, in the region of Donetsk. Tell us more about this.
So you have a number of villages that are falling to Russian forces as they move through this area of the Donbass, which is a key important region in eastern Ukraine because it is the literal eastern flank for the Ukrainian military, right? And as these villages come under Russian control, Russians are occupying them. They're also destroying them with artillery fire, village by village. This is what happened in Mariupol. This is what's happening in the east of the country. The other thing that we don't know, Hallie, is how many Ukrainian soldiers are dying on the eastern front. President Zelensky said it could be between 50 and 100 every day. It gives you an indication of how fierce the fighting is.
Cal Perry live for us there in Kyiv. Cal, thank you. Good to see you tonight. Appreciate it, as always. Turning back to Washington now, where former Donald Trump aide Peter Navarro is fighting a subpoena from the January 6th committee by suing them and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. We're learning about this just a few hours ago. Navarro representing himself in a lawsuit. He's calling the January 6th committee illegitimate and partisan. Why? Listen, his whole goal here is to block a subpoena that the committee filed against him last year to get him to come in and answer some questions. Navarro now joining some other Republican lawmakers, although he, of course, is not a lawmaker himself, who were in the committee's spotlight. And for a couple of them, they're facing a deadline day, specifically the guy in the middle, the top Republican in the House, Kevin McCarthy, and the guy to the right, Congressman Mo Brooks. They have until today to decide whether or not to comply with a committee subpoena. Hallie Vitale is joining us now from Capitol Hill. So, Hallie, let me take this in a couple of buckets, and let's start with Peter Navarro. How does he fit into the January 6th committee investigation and their push to try to get more answers here?
Well, look, he's one of those key White House officials from the Trump era that they want to talk to, but of course, who's saying they're not going to comply with the subpoena that was issued by the committee. Navarro's important to this, both because he was in the White House at the time, but also because he was someone who was allegedly in contact with people who were pushing efforts to put other slates of electors into play and to overturn the 2020 election results. All of that is critically important to the committee's work. It's why it's so important for them to try to talk to Peter Navarro, Hallie.
There's also something interesting in this draft lawsuit that says Navarro was recently served with a grand jury subpoena dated from, I think, May 26th by FBI agents. He also wants to stop that from being enforced. What's interesting here is we can read between the lines, I think, and it tells us a little bit more via inference of the other investigation happening into the insurrection, which is being conducted, of course, with oversight of the Department of Justice.
Yeah, because we've seen these two investigations happening side by side on different sides of Pennsylvania Avenue, effectively. The January 6th committee going about their work. And of course, we have a little bit more public insight into that because they're not bound in the same ways to the mysteries of grand juries the way that federal prosecutors are. But of course, we know that the federal prosecution into January 6th has really hinged around the rioters themselves. They've got hundreds of cases there. But what we know now by inferring from what Peter Navarro has said, and he does specifically in this letter that I'll read to you say that on May 26th, he had two FBI agents banging loudly on my door in the early hours to present me with a fruit of the poisonous tree, in his words, grand jury subpoena, commanding me to comply with the original illegal and unenforceable subpoena issued to me by the committee dated February 9th, 2022. So we're seeing now the ways in which these two things are intersecting, the DOJ and the January 6th committee, and that's where it's critically important. The fact that DOJ is theoretically banging on Peter Navarro's door, telling him that he has to comply with the subpoena that was initially offered to him by the January 6th committee, that's a really notable intersection. And what it shows is that the DOJ investigation might be speeding up and it might be broadening out past just the rioters themselves into the former president's inner orbit.
Okay, so take the other bucket then for me as it relates to Kevin McCarthy and Mo Brooks here. And there is a reason, particularly when it comes to the top Republican in the House, Kevin McCarthy, that you see headlines and we talk about it being unlikely that McCarthy will comply with this subpoena from the January 6th committee. And that's because of what his lawyers already said.
Right. And his lawyers actually are arguing something similar to what Peter Navarro is arguing, and what we've seen other people who don't want to comply with the subpoenas from the January 6th committee argue, that the committee itself doesn't have the legitimacy to even ask for these things. So they're trying to put forward that argument. It's why we feel really confident in saying that we're not going to see the McCarthys and the Brooks and the other Republican lawmakers going before the committee, both for the political reasons that are associated with that, but then also because they're arguing it's not legitimate. They can't then go before the same committee that they said is illegitimate. It just wouldn't make any sense.
Allie Vitale on Capitol Hill for us. Allie, thanks. Good to see you.
Thanks. You too.
Elsewhere in Washington, you've got the Supreme Court escalating this push to try to figure out exactly who leaked their draft opinion from Justice Alito to overturn Roe versus Wade, escalating this unprecedented move, according to a CNN exclusive. This report says that some clerks are worried about how deep officials are taking their search to figure out who gave Politico this document, or how Politico obtained this document, we should say. They're reportedly being required to hand over their phone data to sign affidavits. And some of these requests have some of them thinking about hiring their own outside legal counsel. We haven't heard much else about this investigation since this all went down. But keep in mind, we're going to hear some kind of decision from the Supreme Court on this Dobbs case, the one that could overturn Roe, before the end of the term next month. Pete Williams, our justice correspondent, joins me now. And listen, Pete, let's be real, right? We only know as much as is being reported here. But do you find this surprising at all?
No, I don't. I don't find this leak about the leak to be information that would really be surprising, because I don't see how the Supreme Court could seriously conduct a leak investigation without looking at phone records. You talk to the companies that do this for private companies that are brought in to do leak investigations. This is right out of the playbook. You look at phone records, you look at email records, you look at whether there are serial numbers on the Xerox machine and all that kind of stuff. So this is the fact that the Supreme Court would do it, I know, is certainly causing ripples of concern inside the court. But the fact that it would be done in a leak investigation is unremarkable. It would be like saying, what a surprise that the cops who showed up at the crime scene were taking fingerprints. That's what they do.
You talked about the ripple of concern. Can you tell me more about these tensions, right? Because it's not like all they're doing, and I don't mean to be flip here, but they're not just like sitting around either cooperating with this investigation or not, right? They're doing work. You've got this late June deadline for the Supreme Court justices. They have these huge cases ahead of them, decisions that we are all still eager to find out what has happened, right? There's a lot happening there.
This is the busiest time of the year for the Supreme Court clerks and the justices themselves. The court has 33 cases left to hand down. There are now 4 more scheduled decision days. Clearly, they're going to have to add more. There's a lot of work to be done, including the big cases, the abortion case, gun rights, some freedom of religion cases. There's still all the biggies of the term coming. So, yes, it's a very heightened time, always is. But then you add to it the suspicion about who was the leaker, the concern that it's causing inside the court, the disruption of this investigation. I mean, all the norms are sort of being shattered here, so you can imagine what turmoil it's causing inside the Supreme Court.
Pete, good to see you. Thank you. More bad weather's on the way for about 22 million of us, from the Texas Panhandle all the way up to the Great Lakes in the next couple days. That's after tornadoes and heavy storms ripped through the Midwest in the last 24 hours. Listen to Minnesota. 5 reported tornadoes, right? Downing power lines, as many as 100 houses damaged. At least one of the tornadoes was confirmed in the city of Ferrara. Luckily, nobody was seriously hurt. And down in Mexico, you have Hurricane Agatha losing steam after making landfall overnight on some beach towns and fishing villages with a ton of rain, mudslides, etc. People nearby had to board up their windows and take shelter to avoid the worst of it. Agatha was one of the earliest and strongest hurricanes on record to hit North America from the Pacific. The great Al Roker joins us now. Al, Hurricane Agatha, yes, weakening, remnants, though, moving into the Gulf of Mexico, right? Then what?
That's right. Well, here's the interesting thing, Hallie. Hurricane season starts in the Atlantic tomorrow, and we're going to be watching Agatha as it makes its remnants and way into the Gulf. So it's dissipated over the mountains. Now, this residual moisture is going to be moving to the northeast toward the Yucatan Peninsula. We all know about Cancun and Mayacoba, places like that. So this is all going to be starting to make its way into the Gulf. Now, if this becomes a tropical storm, it will become Alex, and it's got a chance of formation 70% in the next 5 days, and it moves across. Even if it doesn't become a tropical named system, it is going to dump a ton of rain along the southern peninsula of Florida. So we're going to be watching that very carefully. Now, we've got severe weather to talk about. We had that area you showed yesterday, from yesterday. We've got this risk of severe thunderstorms. We've got thunderstorm watches and warnings now from Texas all the way into southern Kansas. And in fact, we've got 22 million people at risk there. Lubbock, Texas, Oklahoma City, just into Wichita and stretching all the way to Chicago. 22 million people tonight. Couple of tornadoes possible. Those nocturnal tornadoes, twice as deadly. Wind gusts of up to 75 miles per hour, Hallie. And then tomorrow, it extends into the northeast, into Ohio, the Ohio River Valley, and all the way down to Texas. Again, we're talking 18 million people at risk, and of course that low tornado risk, but damaging winds and hail. And Hallie, how do you like this heat we've been getting? A little pre-summertime stuff. You like that?
The jury's out. I don't know. Like, it's summer, right? Of course it's hot, but like, you know, I ride my bike to work, Al. I came in looking like a mess today. You know.
Well, you know what? Here's the good news. You're going to get a break in just a little bit. We've got still this chill out through the plains, so that's good news if you don't like the heat. But here in the east, above average temperatures. So for tomorrow, Washington, D.C., 94 degrees. So you can look like that ringed out rat kind of look again, just kind of sweating. And, no, I didn't say you. I didn't say you.
But I look cute like that, though.
No,
I look, yeah.
You look hot in so many different ways. Raleigh, 96 degrees. That's 13 degrees above average. Nashville going to be 91. Same in Memphis. But the good news is we get a breather. That front comes through, and look at this. Boston, temperatures going into the weekend into the mid-60s. New York City, mid-70s. D.C. cooling off into the low 80s. Same in Richmond. Pittsburgh will be in the low 70s. Buffalo into the upper 60s. So the good news is, Hallie, this is not a long-term heat wave.
Which is a good thing.
But just a reminder that summer's coming. And remember, about a couple of months ago when you were all saying, hey, when's it going to warm up? Well, it's here, people.
Al, you have a way with words, my friend. Listen, my only relief, I'm on assignment in Indiana tomorrow. So I'm on a plane away from that 94-degree heat.
There you go.
You're the best. Thank you. We'll look for more of you tomorrow morning on the Today Show.
Thanks, Hallie.
Coming up, where in the world is Johnny Depp? Play that and what jurors are asking the judge today, this note from them to the judge in the case against Amber Heard. We're going to have the latest on those deliberations. Plus, actor Kevin Spacey says he's confident he can prove he's innocent. What else he's saying about the sexual assault charges against him? Next. The jurors in the Johnny Depp-Amber Heard trial have gone home for the day, but not before asking the judge if they should consider whether the headline of Amber Heard's Washington Post op-ed was defamatory to Depp, or if they should consider the whole article, the whole thing itself. The headline, remember, which is at the center of this case, is, I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. That has to change. The judge told the jury it's clear the statement is the headline and not the whole op-ed. One of three statements, by the way, that the jury has to weigh in determining whether to rule for Depp, who again says that Heard defamed him when she wrote that op-ed. So as the jury deliberates this $50 million lawsuit, I should say, against Heard, remember, she's countersuing for $100 million. It appears that Johnny Depp is not near this Fairfax, Virginia courtroom. He's not in L.A. He's apparently outperforming in Europe. He gave a couple of surprise performances with Jeff Beck. He's supposed to do more. Beck said the two have been working together for several years, and they thought now was the time for fans to hear this performance. Steve Patterson joins us now with more. I kind of want to start there, Steve, with, like, Johnny Depp is now overseas. Like, do we know where he is? Is he still overseas? He did these two on-stage performances, I think at least two, right?
As far as we know, he's still overseas in the UK, still planning on more performances. And look, I was standing in the crowd on Friday as Johnny Depp was leaving the trial and coming to the trial, and both times the screams were deafening. I met people who were from London, from Brooklyn, from Indiana, from Michigan, from Texas. There were people from LA. People came all over the world just for a glimpse that lasted like 5 seconds of Johnny Depp. So I think, look, if you look there, you look online, you talk about the court of public opinion, that ship has sailed. That verdict is in. Johnny Depp wins the court of public opinion by a landslide. And I think separately, this is the Johnny Depp is a celebrity. He's not like you or me, who maybe is expected to hang around a trial, maybe expected not to make these public appearances. I think people have the expectation of their celebrities, not only that they will do stuff like this, but that they want to see celebrities do stuff like this. So I don't think this hurts him in any way as far as that's concerned. He's still very popular online. Whether or not, you know, this constitutes sort of another blemish on abuse survivors when they want to speak up about stuff like that, I think that's a separate conversation that you and I could have. But for now, we know he's there, and he's planning on more performances. Hallie?
So the jury is still deliberating. Meanwhile, split screen. Meanwhile, back here in Virginia, and this note to the judge was specifically asking about the op-ed in the Washington Post. I said it at the top, and it's true. This is key to this entire case, right? Did Heard defame Depp when she wrote this op-ed, which, by the way, never specifically mentioned Depp by name? Why is the distinction of headline versus article so important to jurors? And do you think it signals anything about which way they're leaning or how talks are going?
So, first of all, I don't envy this jury. I mean, not only do they have to go back through 6 weeks of testimony with dozens of witnesses, audio, video, images, make a determination on both the suit, the countersuit, but also make a determination on the damages. But I looked at the verdict sheet, Hallie. It is 42 questions spread out over 8 pages. This question they had an issue with was question number 1. So let me just read it one more time. It says, it reads in part, I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. So to answer your second question first, which does this maybe give us an indication of which way they're leaning? I don't think so. I think this is a question of process. They are literally asking the judge, okay, when we're talking about defamation, are you talking about, in this specific statement, are you just talking about the headline, or are you talking about determining defamation in the entire article? I think they're just literally asking that, but it's important for 2 reasons. One, it mentions sexual violence in that headline. Remember, the cornerstone, or one of them in Heard's defense, is that basically if there were any instances of violence, Heard's team argues, whether that be physical or sexual or even emotional or even financial, anything that has to do with spousal abuse, because the article itself does not mention sexual abuse specifically, then you have to rule in favor of Heard. But because the headline does, that's a different conversation. And 2 is that just like any article, op-ed, really in any major newspaper across the country, with some exceptions, the person that writes the article doesn't write the headline. Amber Heard did not write this headline. So not only do they have to determine another layer of how much influence did she have on the headline, but it's just more that they have to go through. But I don't think it determines which way they may be leaning at this time, Hallie.
Steve Patterson, thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Got it.
Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the UN says Iran now has enough enriched uranium to build a nuclear bomb. Experts think this stockpile is enough for one bomb, and that Tehran has the technical ability to actually make it. This new report comes as international talks meant to revive the 2015 nuclear deal have stalled. Number 2, a federal jury has acquitted former Clinton campaign lawyer Michael Sussman of lying to the FBI, finding him not guilty. This was the first trial in the investigation into the investigation, as it's called. Special counsel's John Durham's look into the origins of the Trump-Russia investigation. Today, Sussman is telling reporters he's grateful for the verdict. Number 3, Shanghai finally lifting its COVID lockdown for about 2 months. And we talked about it on this show, right? Something like 25 million people there were essentially confined to their homes. Now public transportation is coming back. People can actually go to work, walk around like normal. Number 4, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is proposing a national freeze on gun sales in that country. Handguns, specifically. It comes in response to an increase in homicides in Canada in the last 2 decades. Still don't know yet whether that legislation would actually ever become law. We'll keep an eye on that. Number 5, Kevin Spacey says he will voluntarily appear in the UK to face new charges against him. He's been charged with 4 counts of sexual assault by 3 different men. If he does not appear in court, British authorities plan to seek his formal extradition from the U.S. Lia Thomas, remember her? She was the first transgender athlete to win an NCAA championship, with her win setting off this national debate over who should be allowed to compete in women's sports. And now, for the first time, she's talking on camera about the controversy she found herself in. Thomas swam on the Penn men's swimming team for 3 seasons before joining the women's team her senior year after going through 30 months of hormone therapy, well beyond the NCAA requirement. She told ABC News trans women are not a threat to women's sports.
Trans people don't transition for athletics. We transition to be happy and authentic and our true selves. Transitioning to get an advantage is not something that ever factors into our decisions.
You didn't transition to win more medals?
No.
Some of Thomas's critics have argued her participation takes opportunities away from women born female, several cisgender women. Several states have even introduced bills to restrict transgender athletes' ability to compete in sports. Let me bring in Stephen Romo with more on this. And there was a lot that Thomas talked about here in this interview, including that she hoped to compete in the Olympics. Would that be a possibility for her?
Yeah, it was fascinating to hear from Lia finally after all of this time, Hallie. Of course, hearing from her about this topic, saying that she has dreamed since she was 4 years old on going to the Olympics. And there are protocols in place for her to do that. The USA Swimming recently put new rules into place. They actually didn't take effect until after she won this NCAA tournament. But there is a path there. The requirements are a bit more strict than they were for the NCAA about the amount of testosterone that can be in a trans athlete's blood up until they actually are able to compete. But there is an avenue in place, and it sounds like from this interview that's something that she's going to go after.
There's been some, we talked about critics of Thomas's. Some of them have suggested that Thomas, other trans female athletes will always have an unfair advantage in some sports because they cannot undo puberty when testosterone flooded their bodies. You've had athletes like Martina Navratilova, for example, saying that Thomas would have an unfair advantage. Did Lia Thomas respond to this?
Yeah, there have been studies, as you mentioned, showing that there could be some possible advantage continuing on up to a year that had been the requirement, the hormone replacement, a year-long hormone replacement. But the research, there's more research that still needs to be done. Even researchers on this project have said similar things to that. And Lia did reference this. She talked about that criticism. She said it's been one of the main criticisms. Here's more of what she said about that.
I'm not a medical expert, but there's a lot of variation among cis female athletes. There's cis women who are very tall and very muscular and have more testosterone than another cis woman, and should that then also disqualify them?
Yeah, you hear there she has more questions, as do many people, including her own teammates who raised questions about the fairness of having her compete, Hallie.
So what does the competition picture look like, Stephen, next year for the NCAA?
Yeah, as I mentioned, those new rules that have now been put into place that are a bit stronger than they were before about the amount of testosterone and how long testing should go. Instead of just 12 months now, it is 36 months, testing that specific amount of testosterone in the blood for how these trans athletes will be able to compete. But there is an avenue for them, just a few more hoops to jump through now, Hallie.
Stephen Romo, thank you. When we come back here on the show, have you heard who was at the White House today? BTS. And maybe some members of their so-called army will talk about what they told reporters at the press briefing. Also, on the last day of AAPI History Month, how one school is fighting anti-Asian hate with history. That's our backstory. Stay with us. Fascinating visitors at the White House today. Not heads of state, not other world leaders. BTS, man, BTS, the mega star K-pop group behind hits like Dynamite and Butter. They're showing up. They're meeting with President Biden, not to serenade him, right, but to talk about the increase in anti-Asian hate crime, about fighting discrimination, about the importance of inclusion and representation. This is them right before that meeting. They showed up at the mics. Single mic, I guess, in the White House press briefing room. They did not sing, much to the chagrin of all of the correspondents that cover the White House in that room. But one of the members did say the group is still surprised that music created by South Korean artists reaches so many people around the world, transcending languages and cultural barriers. Last year, BTS talked about their experiences with discrimination in a statement that's gone viral. It's been retweeted more than 1 million times. And that leads us into our backstory tonight, our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together and how it fits into our bigger picture. And for this, we're talking about the rise in anti-Asian violence since the start of the pandemic and the push to try to use education to try to stop it, basically. There's a study recently that found that in much of the country, K through 12 curriculums for history, U.S. history, focuses mostly on Japanese incarceration and anti-Asian immigration laws. But a lot of states are working to change the conversation. Illinois and Connecticut have passed laws that make schools add AAPI history to their classrooms. And New Jersey's going to add a focus on the contributions and heritage of the AAPI community this fall. At least 4 other states are working on similar bills, something one social studies teacher says is long overdue.
I think part of it starts with education, and it fundamentally starts with education, that our teachers, our students and our teachers and our future teachers need to learn more about the narratives that are absent. And I think Asian American history is largely one of those narratives that has been left out.
Joe Kent is joining us now with more. So, Joe, you visited this New Jersey school that's committed to putting this curriculum in place. You talked with students who have experienced anti-Asian hate. You know, this segment is all about going behind the scenes. Tell us how this reporting came about. What drew you to this school? Why these students in particular?
You know, it was a real journey. We first saw these laws being passed last year, and it felt like a landmark moment in my own personal experience growing up. It really was a limited AAPI education in schools in Minnesota, public schools, and it's just the way it was. I didn't know anything different. And so when I pitched the story to NBC Nightly News, I thought, you know, this is a way for us to show how change is possibly happening, because we know that 1 in 3 students have reported a hate incident at school to their parents. And so this is a really major issue for Asian American students. And so we ended up going to New Jersey. It's the second state to have passed this kind of law. Illinois was the first. And it was actually kind of tough for Michelle Cho and I, our producer, to find people who would be willing to talk to us about this, even though these laws have been passed. And what we found is that, you know, people want to advance the cause and share this, you know, new moment, ideally a watershed moment. But it was just, it was a tough one to book. And so we ended up at Ridgewood High School, and they were so generous to welcome us in. And part of the reason was because they're ahead of the curve. They're doing this already as this law gets implemented later this year. And they're one of the examples as to how it might be done across the country, because a lot of this is left up to each individual school district, right?
I think that's super interesting that you found this one, like in our parlance, hard to book, right? To find people to talk about it, because it's also one of those things where I think there's a lot of schools that want to be seen as on the forefront, on the leading edge of this. And as a country, like, if you look at the holistic picture, not quite there yet.
Yeah, certainly not quite there yet. And if you look at the hate incidents that have proliferated, especially during the pandemic, the senior at Ridgewood High School that we interviewed, Christina Wong, I mean, she just really opened up about her own experience, how she was coughed on when she was out with her parents during the pandemic. But she took that moment and took action and joined the efforts to pass this bill in New Jersey to call for this change. And what's really interesting, too, is this is all happening in the backdrop of the debate about critical race theory. And, you know, we all want better, more inclusive education in our schools, but obviously that is up for a huge amount of debate. So I think part of the reason it was tough to report out the story, which thankfully we ultimately were able to do, is because each individual school district and each state has such a different approach, and a lot of it, frankly, is still TBD. I mean, Connecticut just passed their version of the law, and it won't be implemented till 2025.
Right, which is another several years away. You know, you mentioned something at the beginning of this conversation. You talked about how for you, even growing up in schools, you know, obviously coming up through the school system, you didn't see a lot of this being taught in curriculums. And I know for you, this is not the first time that you've reported on this issue, on anti-Asian violence, on the work being done to combat that kind of violence. I think about, you know, the spa shootings near Atlanta that killed 6 Asian Americans last year, among others. You know, covering stories like those, so difficult. Now covering some of these new laws going into place. I wonder how that impacts you personally, right? And the way that you're sort of doing the work in your professional life that also touches you in like a different part of your life.
It's impossible, and Hallie, you know this from reporting all across the country, that there's no story that doesn't touch your heart, right? And I think this one just hit a little bit closer to home. My mom is Chinese American, grew up speaking Mandarin at home, and it really was really tough to see hate incidents continue, and they still continue to proliferate to this day here in New York City and beyond, right? So seeing this was so heartening, because when we went into that school, we didn't just interview Christina. We talked to her classmates, and they all come from different backgrounds, and they all, when I asked them, I said, are you being taught enough Asian American history in school? Not one raised their hand, because they want more. They want to be more inclusive, and they believe that this is one part of a larger solution to stopping the anti-Asian violence and the hate that we keep on seeing, Hallie.
Joel and Ken, I'm so glad to have you with us. I'm so excited to watch your story later tonight.
Thank you.
The full piece on Nightly News. Thank you so much. And so people know, you can watch more of this, Educating America's Kids on Asian American History, tonight on Nightly with Lester Holt, coming up in just a little bit. Coming up here on the show, we'll talk about how Buckingham Palace is getting ready for this huge bananas platinum jubilee celebration and the royal reunion between Harry and Meghan and the rest of the family. Buckle up, because we're taking you to London in a minute. NBC covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Southeast Bureau, the Supreme Court blocked just today a Texas law that was intended to restrict how much social media companies can control content on their own platforms. The law would have stopped companies like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube from banning or censoring posts based on viewpoint. It came in response to what Governor Greg Abbott called a movement to silence conservative ideas. The court's move being seen as a win for big tech. Those companies say the law would have stopped them from removing radical propaganda. From our Midwest Bureau, a huge fire at a chemical plant in Omaha, Nebraska overnight. Look at this. You can see the black smoke from miles away. That is a lot. Folks nearby had to evacuate. At one point, hundreds of people didn't have power. Fortunately, nobody was hurt. Most of the fire at this point is now out, but they still don't know what caused it. And from our West Coast Bureau, doggy doors can be good, right? Sometimes convenient for you. But what about hugely inconvenient when a coyote comes inside? Look at this. Drops into the backyard off like a wall, slides into the doggy door. Oh my goodness. You don't see it in the video. He ends up coming back out. Family didn't even know until they checked their cameras. That is a wily coyote. Right now, Buckingham Palace, total party mode, man. They're getting ready to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee later on this week. Because starting on Thursday, she will be celebrating 70 years on the throne, becoming the first British monarch to reign for that many years. The Jubilee is also kind of a PR opportunity for the palace as it works behind the scenes to get the stage ready for Prince Charles, who is next in the line of succession to the Queen. And then you have these two, Harry and Meghan. They're expected to fly into the UK any day now for the celebrations after, I know you remember, they stepped down as senior royals more than 2 years ago. They're going to be back for a couple days. The Queen herself extended that invitation. Keir Simmons joins me now, live from London. So one big happy family, Keir, now that Harry and Meghan are coming in from North America? What is this?
I don't think so. I don't think you're going to see one big happy family. Just to let you know, by the way, Hallie, that's Buckingham Palace at the end of the mall there behind me, lit up. A little sneak preview.
This is a gorgeous live shot. I know.
In a few days' time. It's gorgeous, right? I think it must be driving the Queen crazy, though, because she famously goes around Buckingham Palace switching off the lights. So you can imagine, Charles, what are you doing? Anyway, to your question, we don't know when Harry and Meghan are going to arrive. Maybe they're here already. We suspect they're going to try and take a low profile because, of course, they're not going to want to overshadow the Queen's Jubilee. But in terms of, happy reunions with the family, everybody knows about the tensions that are there. Right. Never mind, whose side you're on. Look, it's their daughter's birthday on Saturday, and I noted that there was an announcement that quite a number of the members of the royal family, including William and Kate, are heading off to other parts of the country on Saturday to play their part around the country in Jubilee activities. So there are reports the Queen will see Lilibet, the little one, for her first birthday, but I'm not sure who else will, and I'm not sure how friendly the whole thing's going to be. Privately, Publicly, though, of course, they'll put on a brave face.
And that's because, I mean, and people, we don't have to rehash the whole Harry and Meghan story, but literally leaving, stepping away from the royal family for a variety of reasons, including, of course, accusing the palace of being essentially taking racial motivations against Meghan. So there's that. There's also, Keir, the fact that as we've led up to this Jubilee week, which is a huge deal overseas, right? That's a huge deal there. We haven't seen quite as much of the Queen because she's taken a little bit of a step back with mobility issues, right? Do we think that's going to be an issue this weekend or what?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, she's 20. She's not 26 anymore. She's 96, of course. She's frail. We are getting ready for the parade that will come right down the mall here. Horse Guards, Irish Guards, many others. And she could be in a carriage on her way to the parade ground here, but she may not be, simply because there's a question about, how fit she will be. I think they're going to take each event at a time.
Wow.
And I think it's not just that she's frail. I think, Hallie, it's also that she's proud. And I suspect she doesn't want to be seen struggling. So, the Queen is getting older. 70 years on the throne.
Right.
What an achievement. No other monarch has managed to get to this milestone.
And these festivities obviously celebrating her first and foremost, honoring her. But as we referenced in the introduction to you, in some ways setting the stage for Prince Charles, too.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, I talk about this in a new podcast I have out called Born to Rule. It's all about what will happen when we lose the Queen and Prince Charles ascends to the throne. We are seeing a slow process of kind of getting this country used to the idea of King Charles. He stepped in, for example, for something called the state opening of Parliament a few weeks ago. You saw that, Hallie. It didn't have to be him stepping in for the Queen, but he did, and I think that just gives you an indication that there is this process. They always do things slowly, the royals, but there is this process of just kind of preparing people for, at some point, King Charles. But, I don't think anyone really understands or kind of has come to terms with what it's going to be like when that time comes to lose the Queen. 70 years. There are few people around who actually remember a time before the Queen was Queen.
Keir, I only have like 10 seconds with you, but do you feel it, like a difference in sort of the week with the celebrations behind you, the parade that's about to happen, Buckingham Palace all lit up? Like, I know we talk a lot about how sometimes Americans think more of the royals than some Brits do, right? Do you get that feeling that people in the UK are excited about this moment?
You do. You are obsessed with the royals. You really are. Listen, I'll tell you something about the British.
That's personally maligning me, Keir.
Like it is.
I don't even know what that is.
Listen, I'll tell you something about the British. We don't get excited early. We could exaggerate and say there's this sense of excitement. But when the time comes, I think there will be a real party atmosphere. They are expecting 1 million people out in the streets. Lots of people have community parties planned. The Brits just kind of take a little longer to warm up.
Don't tell me you never get excited, Keir Simmons. I don't know, man. I mean, we'll see. We'll see.
I never get excited.
I was going to tease your podcast, and then you had to go and, insult my love for the royals. Keir Simmons, thank you. I don't, to be clear. I'm very objectively, journalistically neutral on the royals. Thank you. Keir Simmons, this live shot's gone off the rails, but Born to Rule, Keir's podcast. Very good. You should tune in. All right. Our thanks to Keir. To tonight's original now, with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been watching. Unretirement, it's called. It's happening more and more. And if it's your first time hearing that term, listen, it's exactly how it sounds. Retired folks choosing to unretire and rejoin the workplace. Remember, back at the start of the pandemic, we saw a spike in retirement and a drop-off in folks leaving retirement. But as of last month, 3.5% of people who were retired a year earlier are now going back to work. 1.7 million people. Some context, the unretirement rate dipped as low as 2% toward the beginning of the pandemic in June 2020. Jake Ward is helping us understand why it is that we're seeing this trend. Watch.
For thousands of Americans on the verge of retirement, COVID was a great reason to finally leave the world of work behind. The pandemic led Scott Ward to reevaluate a Silicon Valley HR career spent endlessly traveling.
After I retired, I started doing things that I guess retirees do, right? I played video games a lot. I rode a motorcycle a lot, but it got kind of old after a while.
And within a few months, he realized he was not ready to hang it up.
I was bored or anything else. I felt like I wasn't fulfilling what I was capable of, and I wasn't done.
Unretirement, in which older people re-enter the workforce, is on the rise in the United States after stalling during the pandemic. There are an estimated 5.6 million more job vacancies than there are available workers, giving enormous power to job seekers. And some fields are particularly short-staffed. The Labor Department says we'll need more than 1 million new nurses to replace those leaving the field. And retired nurse Michelle Wenzel says she honestly misses the work.
I love helping other people, and I love learning new medical information. I don't know, it really charges my battery.
She thinks she can find a gig that accommodates her arthritis.
Being on my feet for 4 hours is the most I can do.
But not everyone is simply going back for the satisfaction of it. Inflation means everything today is 8.5% more expensive than it was a year ago. That can blow up the household budget of any retired person living on a fixed income. For Dr. Connie Kitchens, who retired as an educator in 2018, her and her husband's fixed income supported them just fine. But then her daughter developed breast cancer.
She and her 2 children moved into our homes. Unfortunately, my daughter passed away in 2019, and now my husband and I, we have gone from living off of an income that was meant for 2. Now we have to provide for 4 people.
Now, Dr. Kitchens is back with students.
I have obtained employment, and I am teaching online.
Michelle Wenzel says each day's mail brings a job offer.
I've had a lot of opportunity without doing anything.
And Scott Ward is at a pharmaceutical company and has begun acting.
I have a movie called Craving that I'm filming next week down in Burbank. It's a horror movie.
COVID led thousands of Americans to step off the professional path. Now, as the country reopens and the economy clamors for them, the post-pandemic era has many of them stepping right back on. Jake Ward, NBC News, San Francisco.
Our thanks to Jake for that, and our thanks to you for joining us this hour. We're going to have a lot more for you here tomorrow, same time, same place. I'm actually on assignment, but you'll be in good hands with Tom Costello. We'll see you back here later this week. More coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.